Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of an unexpected podcast. And today I have my co-hosts Rainier, Evan, Matt, and Mick, and we're bringing in the subject of how to beat this infamous assault on Lothlorien Legion. All right, so that's what this episode is going to be about. We're going to be talking about how to beat it, how to play it, go in depth of this Legion. But before we do that, we're actually going to be doing a list review. So for those of you who don't know, we take lists that you submit on our YouTube channel. And for those of you who are watching on the YouTube channel, comment below your list. We will review it for the first part of every single episode. We do that, and then we move forward into the main topic. And with that being said, Matt, what is the list we have today?
Okay, so the list we have today, as well as this episode, will be brought to all of us by the letter D. The letter
Yes.
D, as in Devin Moreno. All right, so let me put that up on the screen.
That is I feel like this picture of me is more attractive than my real face, so I'm going to use this from now on out.
All right. So Rainier, you know what actually didn't get sent is whose list this is. Whose list is this?
This is a guy by the name of Jerry de Brouwer, and he is from the Netherlands. I think it
Okay.
says at the end of the list.
Oh, okay. All right. All right. So Jerry says, "Hi guys, thanks for reviewing my list. I used it a couple times and it worked out very good. Now a 600-point tournament coming up, and he's still doubting what list I'm going to use. So he's given us two options here. So option one, these are both Numenor or Rivendell alliances. So option one, Elendil on horse, who is the leader, as well he should be. 6 Numenorians with shield and spear, 4 Numenorians with shield. Arrestor with 3 elves with spear and bow, 4 elves with shield, 1 elf with spear and banner. And then we have Círdan, 3 elves with spear and shield. And that comes out at 24 models and 6 might. Then we have option 2, which was Elendil, also the leader, 8 Numenorians with shield, 6 Numenorians with spear and shield, 1 Numenorian with bow and spear. We have Arrestor, again, 1 banner with spear and shield, 2 knights with shield, 2 elves with bow and spear, 4 elves with spear and shield, 3 elves with shield, coming out at 29 models and 5 might. So he knows the scenarios here. The scenarios will be domination, seize the prize, and lords of battle. So those are the two.
He says his
Lists.
name down there, Jerry de Brouwer, and
Yeah,
I'm from
Jerry
the
de Brouwer.
Netherlands. Is that okay? I guess he's just giving us his name. I didn't know if there was like an inside joke there because he has a smiley face.
Yeah, I mean he. So the way this got to us was by a Facebook message from Rainier, who pulled it off of, I assume, was this off the Facebook page or off the YouTube page?
Yeah, this was off the Facebook page.
This was off the Facebook page. So I assume he's got some sort of Facebook handle that's not.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
yeah. And that just didn't come through when Rainier sent it. All right, so I'm going to make one observation and then I'll open it up to the floor, and that's that he knows the scenarios. One of the 3 scenarios is seize the prize. And I think neither of the 2 list options he's giving here have March, which means he may well auto lose seize the prize.
Well, he's got knights and he's got Elendil on the horse.
I mean, all the knights are going to do is block.
But they go 10 inches, and you need a way to go at least 12 inches to get that prize, or at least contest the prize on the first turn. Or else somebody else with March is going to go 12 inches, have a 50-50 shot of grabbing the prize on the first turn, and then a 50-50 shot of getting priority on the second turn and grabbing it then and making off with it. And you're already kind of
how would someone with March get
behind
first
out of the
turn
gates
without? Are you saying like assuming the other army has cavalry? Because if you do a heroic march with cavalry models, it's not going to really do a lot. You need like wargs or something, to move that 12 inches. So
what you want is you want the combination of one guy calls heroic move and the other guy calls heroic march, and they're sitting next to each other, so that if you win the heroic move roll off, you can kind of get past the prize. And get
What
it
I'm
in
saying is, I guess I'm kind of agreeing with Mick in the fact that his knights that can act as blockers, but I mean, his opponent, it's basically going to be a
can't get
50-50
there.
roll off either way.
Yeah, but they can't. Yeah, but he's going to sacrifice that. If he runs into somebody who has a heroic move, I'm sorry, a heroic march, that person will get to the prize on turn one regardless. There's nothing he can do to stop it.
When it's 12 inches away and you move 9 with March, you move.
No,
so you're
yeah,
saying
but
March
you've
with
got
cavalry.
but you've got cavalry, right? So what you do is your cavalry or your mounted hero or your bat or whatever it is that you have that you've taken to kind of deal with this particular
Because
situation.
all his opponents know they have Sea Surprise too.
Exactly.
So probably
right.
grab
So
this.
everybody,
Okay,
everybody who's playing in this tournament ought to show up with cavalry and march.
yeah.
Or
Okay,
cavalry
that makes sense.
and a drum, or cavalry and some way to go that extra 3 inches to get past the objective, wall it off, and get it. Because that's a third of this tournament.
Yeah, I could agree with that. Yeah,
gimmick.
That since everyone else knows, then yeah, that's definitely gonna happen. He would probably not. He's not getting the prize. He's got to beat through it with Elendil, which is a tough thing to. I know he's a huge weapon, but they're going to know it's there.
He can get walled off. Yeah, exactly. So look, whichever way you go on this, you need to figure out how to put a captain in here or somebody with march in here. So that's my initial thought on that, and then I'll open it up to the rest of the floor.
And I guess
So
only to just open on that.
Then do like play around with like the first list because
no, it's not going to work though. Because even if you swap Kieran with the captain, you don't have the horseman, which means that now you're moving 9 inches. You're still not there on the first turn. You
could, for example, do Aristor for Kurdan, or excuse me, Aristor for a captain. Put some guys in. You can still put the knights in Kurdan's warband if you have Kurdan still.
Yeah, but then you have
where are the points for that? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you shrink the list even more.
Yeah, it's kind of iffy. But I do like Elendil in 600-point tournament. He can do a lot of nasty stuff.
I'm not against Elendil at a small points. It's almost got a feeling of the Helm Hammerhand Legion. Is like because he's about as close as you can get without doing that.
But I think Helm Hammerhand would have a lot more models. And actually, if you look at this list, Seize the Prize is really like you got to go fast. And then Domination, actually, that's difficult for this army because there's very few models. Yeah.
So I mean, I think what you need in this list, I'm assuming we're going to stay with the Numenor Rivendell Alliance. What you need in this list is knights and a captain on horse, and the knights, the captain on a horse, and Elendil. The captain's going to call the march. Elendil's probably going to call the move if the other guy's also countering it. And if you win it, what you do at that point is you project Elendil and the captain in front of this thing, and then put a knight behind it, and then knight dismounts, digs the thing up.
Well, no,
remember, Elendil can't move 15. Elendil has to move 10.
Yeah. You're right.
And that's where the issue comes. Well, my original thought process was get Elendil there, dismount him, and then have him try and grab the prize. Because if Elendil grabs the prize, then no one is ever getting it ever.
I'm not mad at that.
Well, but that has the same. That is the same problem.
The issue that arises with that is you can't move first and do that.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because you can try and get it with the captain, but depending on the matchup, the captain is obviously much less safe to try and give the prize than Elendil. But I think the march in general is just very useful for Seize the Prize because it means next turn, if you win the heroic move off, you can then move past the objective with your army. Whereas if you're moving 6 inches twice, you're just barely going to get to the objective in the first place. So I think, yeah, a captain's definitely necessary. I'd say Aristor is what, 85 points? How much is he? Is he 85 or 80?
I think it's
80,
80.
well,
It's one of
right?
those.
Well, one of those. I think with the captain, you probably go horse, lance, maybe try and keep him as cheap as possible to get as many models. Because model count, I think, is going to be important. So that's why personally, we haven't really talked about option one versus option two a whole bunch yet. But I'm personally a big fan of option two, just to be able to have the model count. Um, I'm not sure how useful Círdan will necessarily be in domination and seize the prize. I know he'll probably be pretty good in Lords of Battle. Um, but Lords of Battle is a scenario you're good at anyways. So I'd say get more models so you can do better in domination. So take option two, and then maybe with option two, swap Aristor for a captain on horse with lance and finagle the models around to make up for the points, and that's probably what I would take. I assume that he wants to keep Elendil in the list, and I think the list is pretty solid with Elendil, so
Yeah,
that's
I
what
mean,
I do.
Elendil's a good power piece at 600 points. There's not a lot that can kind of deal with him. So I think that makes sense. And especially with the Elendil, I think is a good choice with these scenarios because he can keep getting Might back in Lords of Battle. Sees the prize. If somebody else gets the prize first, he has a decent chance of heroic combating his way to it. And then if you can get the prize to him while he's still on the horse, he can get away with it. And then domination is really useful because he can use that heroic combat to kind of get from objective to objective.
Yeah. I think domination is another good argument for the captain on horse as well, because sure, Aristor is good and he's strong, but he also only moves 6 inches, and having a second mobile hitting hero to be able to contest the objectives and do a lot of damage in a short period of time, um, I think may lend itself to be more valuable. Because I'm not sure how much the second strike on Aristor is doing in this particular circumstance, because like no one's gonna try and contest Elendil anyways, and Elendil can usually just chop through heroes on his own, so I'm personally a fan of the captain over Aristor in this
Yeah,
situation.
yeah. I also personally prefer captain because if you're mounted, you're probably killing more of basic troops than Aristor is on foot, and you're just more mobile, and so there's like a lot more options for you.
Yeah. I'm not sure, by the way, I would short the shield on the captain if he's going to be the only other hero. Last thing you want is him to get shot out or chopped up.
I mean, I
56
I
anyway.
don't I don't have an issue with not taking the shield on him. Um, because
Thank
like
you.
I don't really care if he dies or survives. Like his purpose is to call 2 heroic moves / marches, get into combat, kill as many guys as possible, and then if he dies or not doesn't matter to me whatsoever.
Right.
It's also like he's still defense 6, which is perfectly functional against normal troops. And if a hero is trying to hunt him down and fight him, then they're not trying to kill your massive, Numenor elf fighting force along with Elendil. I guess the philosophy for me is if they're trying to kill the captain, they're not trying to deal with Elendil, which means that Elendil's killing the army. So I think especially with how sort of strapped for points you are in these lists, maybe not taking the shield is the way to go. But that's just my personal way I like to play captains. So you can do
Yeah.
whatever.
Unfortunately, I'm caught away from I don't have that particular rule book to hand, so I don't know what the captain is. I think the captain fully kitted out is like 90 points. Is
So
that right?
captain is base 75, I think. 10 points for the horse, 5 points for the lance. You want both of those. So 90 with horse
Yeah.
and lance.
Okay.
And
Or
then
Drop a
I
90.
think
knight.
the
You can swap a
75.
knight out for
Well,
something
remember,
smaller.
you're going to need at least 2 knights to make
Yeah, I wouldn't
this
swap a
work.
knight out. I mean,
Because
if anything,
you
you
need it
go
for
down
Seize
to
the Prize.
if anything, you go down to 28 models. Either that or maybe even
Your
no, you
goal,
don't have it.
you're
Maybe
taking
even drop some bows.
you're
Ah,
taking
Yeah.
two knights specifically for seize the prize to do what, flanking, like holding
seize
on
the
to the
prize
captain?
and
Seize the Prize.
domination.
Yeah.
Seize the prize and domination are where you want the knights.
Just be
Domination to
surprised.
contest the back objectives, seize the prize to be able to get to the center early, and also
I think
potentially use to fight off people trying to get off the board.
okay, I'll go with it. I mean, I guess I don't find the knights that critical for both those roles, but I can understand that.
They're essential for Seize the Prize. Because the only folks that matter are the ones that can go at least 12 inches on a march for the first turn of Seize the Prize. Nobody else in the army matters for that first turn of Seize the Prize, except the guys that can get that 12 inches plus to screen off the prize. So if you know you're going to be fighting Seize the Prize, you need to have a plan to get a decent amount of your army past that objective in the center, and have one guy that gets up and dismounts and takes it, and everybody else screens him off for the next turn, hopefully.
So then if we're following, it seems like everyone's pretty much in agreement on take option 2, but pretty much Evan's advice. Pretty much his construction of the list is actually how I would have done it. So yeah, captain in exchange for Aristor, drop some bows. It's yeah, sure. Agreed. Kieran's not doing much anyway.
Yeah, I mean, you got what, 3 more slots in Elendil's warband. So if you need some extra points, you need like those extra 5 points to give the captain a shield. You could drop a few of the elves, and in fact, I think, aren't you going to have to drop? No, you're not. You can drop a few of the elves and make them cheaper Numenorians with shield, or just Numenorians with bow. And you can just have some random Numenorians with bow, and their job is to go and stand on objectives and domination.
All right.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable.
Perfect. Then yeah, then that's pretty much the pick an option 2 then, Jerry. It's the route you should go. Well, obviously with the modifications. Get rid of Aristor.
And add a captain.
Not a captain.
Can't do this without a captain. All righty.
I would like to add a final addendum to that, which is if you are adamant about taking either option 1 or option 2 with no changes, I'd say still take option 2.
Yeah.
In my opinion, because I
Agreed.
think option 1 also has no cavalry in it.
It does not.
Yeah, reduce troop options, and then adding an irrelevant piece to the army is all right.
Yeah.
You know,
And
probably
I don't think Círdan's, as you pointed out, Círdan's not essential to these 3 scenarios. He's useful in Lords of Battle, but that's probably about it. Okay. All righty. So I think the plan today was to finish off our discussion on the unholy trinity of hyper-competitive lists. We've talked about Assault on Helm's Deep. We've talked about the Dragon Emperor Legion, and the last one was Assault on Lothlorien, which is in some ways, I don't know, I think it vies for contention with Assault on Helm's Deep as the worst of the 3. And I think that depends whether your parameter is more competitive, or your parameter for being unholy is more competitive or less fun to play with. Because I think it's play with and against. I think it's more fun to play against than Assault on Helm's Deep, but I think it's also probably the stronger of the 2 lists, although I know opinions differ on that. All right, so what have we had for experience here? I have played against Assault on Lothlorien many times at this point. Probably, I think I played against it at least once in every tournament I played in since the list came out, because it's all over the place. So I have a lot of rounds against it. I played it in one tournament, And I think I played it like 3 or 4 tournament games, and then set it aside for reasons that we're discussing. What are other
Played
folks'
it in more than
experiences?
one tournament. I think like 2 or 3. Um, and then, okay, so well, my experience, um, other than playing against Dad, which I've played against multiple times, um, is I've played like one game of it, which was ludicrous. And I will go into that later on in the podcast. But I've also played against it in the Masters at Articon. Um, I've played against Devin using it. I've played against Dad doing it. So I've played against it with high caliber players playing it. So that's my experience.
I have zero experience playing against it or playing.
Okay, so let's
I
just put
moved
yourself
abroad.
on mute.
So I'm gonna be on this
and-
podcast. Be like, wow,
Yeah,
that makes sense. Wow, yeah,
Rainier, you're kicked from the episode. Please leave.
yeah.
Yep.
On the Articon team, if I play against it, I'm just gonna be like, okay, you guys win. I'm gonna go have myself like a sandwich or something.
Yeah.
I mean, you could be
Nick-
the spectator in a way here. Like you could be asking all the questions. Like, oh, what is this
True.
list?
Yeah,
What
you're
is this list?
I've
What is
never
this
heard
rule?
about
Who is
this
this
list
hero?
before.
so Renair, you like either Gimling or Merry and Pippin, you have the perspective of the audience. You're the one here who doesn't know what we're talking about and asks all the insightful questions that the audience is thinking, so that
For
we can
sure.
answer them.
Okay. After Mick and Devin explain their experience, my first question is, what the heck is it?
All right. All right, put a pin in that. We'll get back to that. Mick,
Pippin.
what's your experience?
I've actually built it recently, and I've been playing it in some friendly games and in one event recently. And I
Alright.
played quite a bit against it at tournaments.
And the letter D. What is your experience?
The letter D has exactly one game of experience. Where,
On which side of it?
I played with it against Evan. And I was kind of figuring it out as I was getting slaughtered. So I was but I mean, I understand the list pretty well. You know what? No, that's not true. I played a couple practice games with it. So no tournament games. I did actually play, I would say 3 practice games with it. And then I outside of that, watched a lot of games of it at Nova.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay.
So-
So here comes the first question. From an outsider point of view, I see it. People say it's broken. People say it's really good. I see it placing on top at events, but also on bottom of events. So that tells me it's really the skill of a player. But the list, why is it so dangerous in people's opinion?
Can I start? So,
Do,
well,
do we want to answer Rainier's first question first, which
Okay,
is
yeah,
what's
first-
in it?
What the hell is it? And why is it dangerous?
So the thing that's like my favorite thing about this list is that it doesn't like in a lot of Legion situations you're kind of pigeonholed into taking certain options, and Legion kind of ends up being the list, and everybody tends to play similarly. But with this list, you actually have a lot of options, and it kind of almost plays like a larger list from just kind of a faction alliance. So in a way, if you're someone who just wants to try out different things within the same list, then it allows you to actually have a lot of different variants depending on points levels. Even like even on 1 point level, you can have multiple variants which work. So
But Mick, what exactly is in this
well,
list?
let's see. So it's basically an alliance of goblins and orcs. We have Musgur, the orc shaman, who him or another goblin hero have to be a leader of this army. The other goblin heroes are Druzak and Ashrak, the other named goblin heroes. Then we can also have an orc captain, an orc shaman, a Moria goblin captain, Moria goblin shaman, Wildwork chieftain, and then our troops can be Wildworks, giant spiders, orc warriors, warg riders, orc truckers, Moria goblin warriors, Moria goblin prowlers, Warg Marauders, and Bat Swarms. So it's basically a bunch of low defense, low quality troops throughout, with some cool rules and some cool heroes and a bunch of beasts, which actually, according to some people, make this list really broken.
So
I actually found that
before-
an interesting comment. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, well, I was going to say actually before we go on, we should talk about the additional rules and the special rules to this
Yes.
list because there's a lot to unpack
Yes.
in those.
So I've got these in front of me. So first of all, the Assault on Lothlorien must always include Musgur and at least one named Goblin hero. So that has to be either Druzhak or Ashrak. Additionally, only Orc hero models can lead Orc warriors, and only Goblin hero models can lead Goblin warriors. Then spiders may only be included in warbands led by Druzhak or Ashrak. And in this legendary legion, Musgur, Druzhak, and Ashrak are heroes of valor, and shamans are heroes of fortitude. So normally, Ashrak would be a hero of fortitude, and shamans are minor heroes. So here they can take more troops with them.
I love how the additional rules in this, by the way, read like a middle school math problem. Have any of you noticed this? That you go through it. Assault on Lothlorien must include Musgur and at least one named Goblin hero. Only Orc hero models may lead Orc warrior models. Only Goblin hero models may lead Goblin warrior models. And Spider models may only be included in warbands led by Druzhak or Aslax. So how many Spider models can be included in the army leader's warband?
And there's like a blank white space so you can
Right.
15 or 27 or 1 or
Yep.
375.
Yeah, it definitely has that. All right, so those are the additional rules. Read through the special rules.
So the special rules are what makes this legion really interesting. So the first one is Cover of Darkness. So this is basically the same darkness rule which exists in Clash by Moonlight. So any battle featuring this legendary legion takes place at night. As such, due to their reduced visibility, models cannot be targeted by shooting. Magical powers or special abilities over 12 inches. Sorry, shooting, magical powers, or special abilities. However, as it is much harder to avoid a shot in the dark, all shooting attacks gain a bonus of +1 rolling to wound. Siege engines may still target enemy models more than 12 inches away. However, in this situation, they will only ever hit on the roll of a 6. Models with the Cave Dweller rule can see as normal, which means Moria Goblin Warriors with bows ignore the 12-inch range, so they can shoot 18 inches. And Cave Dwellers also don't suffer the +1 to wound when they are hit by bows in this situation. So the all of the shots that we're having from the Prowlers and from the Moria Goblins with bows, they will be getting the +1, but shooting back at us, our opponents will not be getting +1.
And just so people know, because this has come up in some games, if you look in the FAQs, because you have certain instances where this darkness will get dispelled, like with blinding light.
Mm-hmm.
And if blinding light is up, the way the +1 to wound works is if you're shooting from the darkness into the light, you still get the +1 to wound. If you are shooting from the light out into the darkness, you still get the +1 to wound. So the only circumstances where that +1 to wound doesn't affect you are when you are shooting from the light into the light, which is an important thing to keep in mind when Galadriel is wandering around the battlefield or blinding light is cast by somebody else. Is that if your goblin archers are inside the light, they can, if they still want their +1 to wound, they can do that by shooting at targets outside the light.
Cool. So then the second rule is Ruthless Savagery. Friendly Orc and Goblin models gain a bonus of +1 to wound in a fight in which the opposing model is outnumbered. Note that supporting models do not count for either side for the purpose of this rule. So this is quite a common rule among Legendary Legions these days. But what it means is that Moria Goblin Prowlers can actually stack that with their two-handed weapons and their Backstabbers rules, which means if a Prowler traps you, they get a +3 to wound. Then additionally, dark magics. Friendly models may reroll any number of d6 when making a casting roll. And venomback spiders. If your force contains Ashrak, then all giant spiders in your force can be upgraded to venomback spiders for free.
And venomback spiders, the ones that instead of rerolling ones to wound, reroll everything to wound.
Everything, that's right.
Yeah.
And dark magics is quite an important rule here, in that not only do shamans basically cast their fury on one dice, additionally, you have Druzag who, with his casting of Enraged Beast on 3+, he can quite reliably cast it on one dice every turn instead of having to use two points of will.
Yeah. Unlike many legendary legions, all 4 of these special rules are incredibly powerful and incredibly important.
Yes.
So there's none of these, special rules of, this particular hero like rerolls 1 to wound in this particular weird situation. These are all like game shifting special rules, which is part of the reason why this army is so potent.
Yeah, it seems a lot like those kind of like mashup Moria armies that people used to make. I know Alisher from the US used to do a lot of these, but it seems like that slightly on steroids.
Yeah.
It's not slightly on steroids.
I mean, the only thing that I'm missing here.
Yeah. This is like the Roid Rage alliance list right here.
Yeah, it's just the whole like that whole era supplement, like Easterlings. I'm just like picturing like Oprah. You get a boost, you get a boost, you get a boost, you get a boost. And this one too, there's like 5 Oprahs just like yelling at you and you get whatever you want.
Yeah, so this is a list that got juiced all the way up, and then somebody came along and insulted its masculinity.
That's what it should be changed into. Assaulted on masculinity.
Well, okay, so with all this in mind, I think it might be useful here to go back through the components of this list. And because once you understand the special rules and how you work and how they work, this list has a lot of goodies.
There's a lot of choices.
Yeah, there's a lot of choices here, but you can't take all of them. And there are a number of different ways to do it. And there are also some things in here that should clearly never be taken. So it may be worth kind of going through this list again and
Sure.
talking through and saying, what's a must take, what's a should take, and what's a never take.
All right,
type
so
situation.
We have Nizgr, Orc Shaman. He is a must take because that's what the rules state.
By definition.
Yep.
Moving on.
If we go through the additional rules, then you must also have one of the other named heroes from Moria. So Druzag or Ashrak must always be taken. And in this case, Druzag is virtually always better, unless you're playing at like 300 points and you really are not gonna take any beasts with you, and for some reason you pick this army. Then you're probably taking Druzag as your
I actually can't imagine ever taking this list without Druzag.
Yeah, like he's like the key character here.
Yeah, I mean, unless your theory of this list is I'm just going to take whole bunches of goblins and nothing else.
Mm-hmm.
But then but then why take Ashrak?
Well, because you have to at that point. You're trying to get the cheaper model.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, Druzag at least contributes to that list. I don't know. Druzag to me is the really second must take. Yeah,
like if you're playing tiny points and you feel like you have to play this army.
Yeah,
like,
all right, maybe.
Like I wouldn't, but if you feel like it, then
all right. I think that is such an edge case that I'm going to go out on a limb and say Druzag's a must take here.
Yeah, okay.
But we've skipped over to.
I'm going to Articon with nothing but goblins in this list.
Yeah. we've skipped over the sure. Orc Captain and the Orc Shaman.
So that's right. So the Orc Shaman is one of those things that you virtually never take.
Yeah.
Because your army is going to be primarily goblins. And the Orc Captain is arguably also the thing that you don't take because the Goblin Captain is just better in this situation.
Right.
Yeah.
And
the only niche the Orc Captain has is taking a warg, and that's not overly useful.
Yeah.
I've seen people do it, but I don't know, it's not something. I think because you want so many beasts, you want to just take the cheapest captain available, and that's generally the Moria Goblin Captain.
Yeah.
Which takes us to Moria Goblin Captain, who is generally needed in his army because the army is very slow, other than its beasts. So generally, you want him as the cheap hero that gives you more troops, and B, March is quite important in this army. Then we're
Yes.
moving on to Moria Goblin Shaman, who is the other hero that's arguably always being taken because terror, because break tests, because your troops are generally low courage, even your heroes are generally low courage.
And not just that, by the way. I mean, outside this list, the reason you take the Goblin Shaman is to get Fury and make your goblins terror proof.
Yes, but here you have your
in
transfix.
this list, yes, because the Goblin Shaman re-rolls all of his casting dice, his transfix is actually useful because he gets 2 chances to roll a 5.
In fact, in most games that I've played, if I was in a situation where where I was feeling comfortable that I'm not gonna break, or that the game is just not gonna go that long, I generally wouldn't cast Fury at all during the game and just try to poke some transfixes.
There's these Goblin Shamans are perfectly effective folks to have around, even in a scenario where Fury is irrelevant because of that rerolled transfix.
They're especially deadly as well with Musger, who's got his transfixes on 4s, right? So basically Musger and these guys run around just throwing 1 dice transfixes at, the 3 will heroes and just chip them down. And then once you hit a transfix on those heroes, you swoop in with your enraged bats and spiders and go for the kill. So I think having a secondary transfix with Musger is very useful.
Yeah, it's a funny thing with these transfixes in that, they're hard to cast, but when they're cast, they're hard to resist. So,
yeah,
it's useful. Okay, so moving on, we have.
But before we do that, I mean, we've discussed Drizag and do you take him, do you not take him? We haven't really had a discussion about Ashrak.
Yes.
And the circumstances of when you take him. Thoughts on that?
Can you guys bundle an Ashrak with like taking spiders in general? Is that what people do?
Yes. If you are not going to take spiders, don't take Ashrak.
Of course, yeah.
Though sometimes people will take spiders and not take Ashrak, but usually if you're taking Ashrak, you'll take more spiders. So usually you won't take more than like 1 or 2 spiders if you're not taking Ashrak. And Ashrak usually goes with like maybe 3, 4 spiders, something like that. Because obviously the only thing that Ashrak really does is make your spiders invisible, and maybe give them fury, though you're never going to do that.
Well, he gives them the free upgrades, and they cannot be
gives them the
upgraded
free
without
that as
without
well.
him
He
in the
buffs
list.
the spiders.
Yeah, because that's the thing. Like the fact that they reroll everything makes them way more powerful than just normal giant spiders in this list.
And let's not gloss over he makes invisible spiders.
I was about to say, I'm like, that's pretty critical.
Yeah, so that I mean, there are a bunch of people who are of the position that Ashrak isn't essential because all he does is give you invisible spiders. I think these people are wrong. I think these people are wrong because make invisible spiders transform this army from a strong army to a deadly army, because they force your opponent. The mere threat of invisible spiders, even if none of them actually get made invisible and run around through your lines and behind you, is enough to force your opponent to change how they fight. Because instead of having to fight, they can't fight frontally anymore. They can't depend on their shield wall to kind of keep the scary enraged spiders out and away from the heroes to trap and kill. Because once you can get an invisible enraged spider, or if Ashrak's going to channel an invisible spider that's wearing the ring and is going to have your fight value, then all of a sudden your heroes need to be protected from threats from 360 degrees, even more so than just the bats flying over the line. Because a bat flying over the line all by itself isn't going to do anything, but a bat and a spider, or an enraged spider that's having your fight value, that can just that can just come in, trap one of your heroes behind your own line, and kill it in one turn, and you have to protect it against that. And that's my position on why Ashrak is, once you get to a certain points level where you can have more than just Drazag and Musger, that he's kind of the next guy you take, just because of how all the complications Ashrak causes for your opponent just by being in your army, even if he never does anything.
So that's the thing where, from my experience playing against this army with people who had Ashrak, it creates a situation where you have to really, really, really plan your moves. And if you make any mistakes, Ashrak can just take you out very easily with this one enraged spider. But it's one of those where if you know how to defend yourself against it, then Ashrak essentially ends up being a bit useless. But if you don't know how to defend against it, then it's almost like Ashrak is going to give this army free wins.
Yeah. I mean, I will say this: the only times I've lost against this army have been in the variant that has Ashrak.
Right.
And I think I played against this army 20 times at this point. And the only games I have lost, and I've played every variant of this, I played against every variant of this army, and the only times I have lost have been when they have Ashrak. And it's because of that problem. And I mean, I remember when I was playing this army too, there have been times when, I played against Alisher, and Alisher, he knows how to defend against Ashrak. He did it right. And I still ended up winning the game, even though I don't think Ashrak succeeded in pulling off any Ashrak-like moves the entire game, because Alisher was checking him. But he had to invest so many resources away from the front line to check Ashrak that I was just able to win the game.
Yeah, that's the interesting part of Ashrak, is that he can literally do absolutely nothing throughout the entire game. Just call like one heroic move with his might point, and still just have this massive effect on how your opponent plays. And I think being able to have that influence and control, and usually what it does is it often keeps your opponent's heroes from going to where they want to go, like into a key beast or model or anything like that, and try to assassinate it or do what they really need to do and like jump out of the lines and try to get a heroic combat off, because they now know that if any small thing goes wrong, their hero is dead because Ashrak is going to kill them. And I think that is the value of having Ashrak, is just the mind games you can play with your opponent.
Now that brings up, how do the warriors hold out, or do they have to work in contingent with the other heroes and monsters and stuff?
Do we want to cover the Warg Chieftain first before we go into warriors?
Let's talk about the Warg Chieftain, then we'll talk about warriors.
Okay, so the Warg Chieftain is the last hero here. He's one of those where some players like to have one, other players just ignore him. So yeah, it's just one of those things within the list where you do have the options at various points levels, and you're not really pigeonholed into taking the same list as most other people are.
Yeah, I mean, the Warg Chieftain is a powerful model. He is a very scary model when he is enraged, but he is also 16 goblins.
Yeah.
And you really need to think about whether or not it's better to have the Wild Warg Chieftain, or 16 goblins in this list. Because when we do talk about warriors, I mean, the one thing all of the warriors in this army have is that they can go down very quickly if things go bad. And if you don't have enough of them, this army will fold like a house of cards before it can get all of its tricks out.
Yeah, I think the Warg Chieftain is a model that is much more popular in versions of this army that don't have Ashrak, because those armies often have hitting power issues because they can't rely on the venom back spiders and the enraged versions of them to get their hero kills. So they need something else to do that. So it's usually the Warg Chieftain. So I'd say if you're taking Ashrak, probably leave this guy at home. But if you're not taking Ashrak, then he is somebody to consider.
Yeah, and if you do take him, make sure you take good care of him and you hide him well, because the Wild Warg Chieftain is not a cave dweller. And if somebody can get shooting within 12 inches of him and his defense 5, all of a sudden, like elf bows will be wounding him on 4 up, and you don't want that to happen. And regular bows will be wounding him on 5 up. He can die very quickly.
Interesting point, actually, to bring that up. I don't play the Wild Warg Chieftain in this list, but
Yeah,
that is a good note.
So that's part of the reason why a lot of the stuff that shows up in other lists, like or captains on warg and stuff like that, just aren't useful in this list. I mean, first of all, you've got plenty of stuff in this list that can do tremendous amounts of damage and move quickly and can do it through terrain better than a chieftain on a warg can. And the chieftain on the warg just can get shot out so easily in this list because of that +1 to wound.
Right, so then moving on to some of the beasts. Obviously, the same thing applies to wild wargs, giant spiders, and bat swarms. They do not have the cave dweller. So we have wild wargs and giant spiders. So if we go to the wild wargs first, there is usually a point on taking a couple. Since they're relatively cheap compared to the spiders and the bat swarms, and if you do need additional 1 or 2 fast-moving models, they can be useful to take. But they're not really the main source of power in the list.
Yeah, I've seen some lists where people will take like 10 or 12 of them. Don't do that.
Yeah,
Like the issue is when you enrage them, they're 3 attacks, fight 5, strength 6, which sounds good on paper until you realize that like basically every moderately strong hero is going to outfight them and just mince them even if they are enraged. And also 3 attacks and strength 6 can only go so far, especially when you're not knocking down or trapping a model. So they
And
just lack the hitting power and the ability to win fights that enraging other things like the chieftain or spiders or even bats can do. So they're very unreliable in that way. And spamming them is really just a waste of your beast models and could be used much better on goblins or more spiders or anything but them, really.
yeah.
So take a couple.
I've seen that happen a bunch of times where somebody like enrages a wild warg, sends it into a hero or even just a guy,
Just
and
dies.
the guy manages to shield it off, and then it just dies from fury at the end of the turn because it's only got 1 wound. It's like, oh well, that was underwhelming. But
No, from
Big waste of
enraged
your
beast.
5 will.
Yeah. So that's the other thing, that like they die from enraged beasts, whilst giant spiders and bat swarms oftentimes just don't care, even if they take the wound.
Yep.
Okay, so then we're moving on to giant spiders. So as we know, with Ashrag, they become venom-bag spiders for free. They're basically the main source of damage when enraged. So lists vary, but I've seen versions which would have like even 4 or 5 at like 700 or 800 points, and I've seen versions which would only like play like 1. So
one of those versions is wrong.
well, there isn't necessarily the right number of them. I have actually played a version recently, which I was using myself, where I had 4 bat swarms and no giant spiders, just to see what happens. And I very quickly realized, well, I definitely want 1 less bat swarm at least, and the 2 giant spiders.
Yeah.
So there's usually a reason to have at least 2, and then however many your points allow.
So you're right that there is not necessarily right number, but I think we can safely say that the number 0 and the number 1 are wrong when it comes to number of spiders in the list.
Yeah, it's probably somewhere between like 2, 3, 4. Like you don't want too many of them because eventually they're not that great when they're not enraged, or
Right.
and their big bases, they just get stuck. Especially if you're in a tight spot and you can send them through with Ashrak. They're just standing at the back. They're not doing anything.
Yeah, you don't
They're
want to try
also
and
expensive.
they are expensive. Yeah, you do not want to try and build a battle line of giant spiders
No.
with this list. That's not what they're for. They hide behind the battle line, and basically what happens is Ashrak and Druzag call one up and go, "You're enraged, and now you're invisible. Go get him!" And then that spider goes in and goes off like a bomb, and you know something will die. And eventually that spider will, that spider may well die on this turn and the next turn too, but something will die. And then and then next turn, Ashrak and Druzak go, "Next spider, you're enraged, you're invisible, go." And the next spider goes.
And remember as well when you do that to cast in that order, because if you make the spider invisible, you're not going to be able to enrage it because you won't be able to see the spider.
Yeah.
All right. So,
yep. The last thing I was going to say is also don't forget Ashrak's channeling ability, because he has the ability basically once per game to channel his Shroud of Shadows and turn one of those spiders into a invisible spider that also has fight value, and then you may not even need to enrage it, because
actually, just for the psychological aspect alone, you should not. My thought is don't spend Ashrak's might at all until
you use it for a game winning play.
Yeah.
Right. When you need the hero who can strike up to get above the enraged fight value, you need to get it so that he can't strike up. And you've got him trapped, and you can kill him and take him down. That's when you use it.
Mm-hmm. Right. So we're moving on. We have Orc Warriors. So there is usually at least one Orc Warrior in this army, and he carries a banner.
Yep.
And most of the time, there seems to be no other Orc Warriors in this army.
I don't know about that, because the other thing the Orc Warriors bring is fight 3. And they, there's a place in this army for Orc Warriors with spears to stand behind goblins.
You could have a few. That's fair enough.
And they're useful to bulk up the regular goblins to fight 3 in appropriate circumstances. There is no reason to take an orc with a shield, an orc with a 2-handed weapon, or God forbid an orc with a bow, because there's nothing in this list that an orc with a bow can do that a goblin with a bow can do better, because orcs aren't cave dwellers. And don't get the +1.
So the thing about spears, it's one of those things where if you're taking a lot of prowlers, then you probably don't need the spears from Orc Warriors. But if you not take any prowlers, then you will want some of the fight 3.
Yeah.
So the reason I said you just take the Orc Warrior with a banner is because I tend to play more on the heavy prowler side. So personally, I wouldn't be going with very many Orc Warriors at all.
I like to. Well, I'm a little different, I guess, because I'll take relatively heavy prowlers, like maybe 12, 14, and then I'll basically make it so that, every group of 2 in my spear supported battle line has fight 3. So I'll do goblin spears behind the prowlers, and then whichever frontline models I have that aren't prowlers, I'll do orc spears behind them, because I really value the fight 3 in the army. It's very good against a couple of problematic matchups that we may talk a bit about later, like Goblin Town it's helpful against, Survivors of Lake Town it's helpful against. Those sorts of armies that are sort of low fight hordes, every fight value matters in that. So that's personally why I like to take them. They're only 1 point more than Goblin Warriors. But on the other hand, they do open up a weakness in the army in that they are easy to wound, because you get the +1 to wound against them. And they also don't benefit from the fury of the Goblin Shaman. So definitely don't take a lot of these guys, but I'd say maybe like 8 to 10 maximum.
Yeah.
If you want to.
The other reason to take some.
That also depends on points.
Yeah,
Like,
well, the other reason to take some is that they're the only things that realistically can go in Musger's warband. And you do not want Musger's warband, particularly if he is your army leader, to be, Musger and a guy with a banner. Because
although
they
I've seen that a lot.
well, so look, one thing this army struggles with is Maelstrom of Battle, because your heroes don't have a lot. You have a bunch of heroes and none of them have that much might. So you can easily end up in a situation where Musger like comes on and Maelstrom of Battle on his own, and you really don't want to be just Musger a banner and all of a sudden a warband of dwarves shows up behind him. That's a bad result.
Yeah, and of course, which is why generally you'd also be rolling last for Musker, so that you get the choice of where he goes, and you can use his might to adjust. So generally, I wouldn't really fear Musker going in the wrong place because he'd be last for one entering.
Yeah, well,
And with 2 points of might, you get the choice.
yeah,
Unless you roll
maybe,
one.
yeah, unless you roll a one, or you roll a two and then all of your army's in the wrong place. I mean, I almost think that if you're going to take that strategy, I almost think that what you do is you roll Musger first, see where he shows up, and then spend everybody else's might to make sure that there's enough guys around him. But even so, I think it's worth having, maybe half a dozen orcs with spears with him.
I mean, I think it's one of those armies where in Maelstrom in general, you want to have everything as close to each other as possible to benefit from all of the bubble effects, from all of the enrages, from all of the invisible, the fury, the everything.
You want to try that, but I mean,
Yeah.
there's enough heroes in this army that you're going to end up with a shaman that comes on and rolls a two, right?
Yeah.
And or Ashrak rolls a two.
Whoops.
Right. That's a problem. So anyway.
Okay, so moving on, we have Ward Riders. Generally they're not as good as the beasts, and they move the same speed as the beasts.
Yep.
I've seen people take some. I've even seen one person take like 5 or 6 of them, but I don't think that's correct.
Right there
I'd
with
say the only use for them is if you want to put throwing spears on them. Maybe take 1 or 2, put throwing spears on them, and then you get a more like long range throwing option.
Let's get another goblin with
I
a
think
bow.
that there's a possibility that taking a couple is useful. Also having the knockdown is nice if you can't trap a guy, just to maybe be able to assist a spider. I'd say maximum 1 or 2. You don't have to take any, but they do have their function in the list.
Next up, we have Orc Truckers, who can also take a ward.
Don't take them.
Don't take them because more than Goblin Warriors with bows are just better.
They are legitimately the one warrior option in this list that I just see no purpose for.
Yeah.
Right.
at
Unlike
all.
every other evil list, your trackers are your worst shooters in this list.
Yeah.
Next we have more Goblin Warriors. So these guys are there's gonna be plenty of them. Obviously, you want to have maximum number of bows on here because of the special rules. And then some number of bows, possibly all of them, want to have spears as well. And then in terms of shields and spears ratio, that will depend on how prowler heavy you are and how many orc warriors you have. So there's a lot of variables here and a lot of different possibilities you can play.
Yeah.
So how many prowlers do you think would be taken at a typical 650, 700 list?
So personally, in my
So throwing
latest
weapons
list,
is-
I had like 18 and I was considering more. But
And how many bows did you have in that same list?
I think it was 14.
Wow.
So
That's crazy. This list just turns into like a Corsair list.
yeah, but at the same time, the prowlers, once they get into combat and like if somebody charges you and you don't really get your spiders or things into the best positions possible, like prowlers just completely get demolished by everything that charges them. So it's one of those things where if you're managing to build your advantage, like you're slowly building advantage with prowlers moving, shooting, moving, shooting, charging, shooting more. So there is a lot of stuff that prowlers can do, but sometimes they can just all fold in combat and your army just collapses.
Yeah. I mean, unlike many of the other things where I've taken strong positions on the whole warriors versus prowlers debate, I'm not sure there's a wrong answer.
Yeah, I agree. Like I've seen all sorts of versions, and
Yeah.
I just don't know what's best. Like I
Yeah.
think for every scenario there's a better idea.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen people build very effective lists that are like just goblins.
Yeah.
And I've seen people with like a few prowlers to like get some throwing weapon shots in there. And I think when I build this list at 600 points, I think I've got about a dozen prowlers in it. Because they are, they are 7 points rather than 5 points. And that adds up after a while.
Yeah.
But I've also seen people take, like Mick does, 18 or 20 prowlers. And that also works. If you're going to go warrior heavy on this, you need to kind of tone down the beasts, so that you're taking between 2 and 4 spiders and no more than 2 bat swarms, and that's it. And then the rest of your killing power is just kind of more goblins. Yeah, I mean, the goblin, I mean, like Mick said, the goblin prowlers are vulnerable once like the lines clash. That's when they really kind of like start to die. Because what makes this list dangerous in close combat is the ruthless savagery rule, where you get +1 to wound if basically you're ganging up on somebody. And that doesn't count like, shield wall to shield wall where you've got a spear in the second rank. It's you need 2 guys in contact with the guy in the front. So you really want to be surrounding people and breaking up their armies. And you really only get this advantage if you outnumber them, and probably outnumber them by a fairly significant margin. So if you want to be in like depending on point size, instead of being in the like 30 to 40 range, you want to be in the 40 to 60 range of models in order to get this. So, as many basically the answer I think is as many prowlers as you can take and still have that numerical advantage. Because it's the numerical advantage that really is what you need.
Yeah, and the other thing with prowlers is that ultimately, if you're taking them, then you begin to rely very heavily on their throwing daggers to do a lot of damage. And if your opponent brings blinding light, then that suddenly makes your army significantly weaker, because you only ever hit on 6s.
Yep. Although, yeah, I mean, what you have to do at that point is basically try and fight the parts of the army that are outside of the blinding light.
Yeah. Right, so moving on, we have Warg Marauders. So I personally haven't used one in this army, but I've seen people sometimes take one. So I would say it's more of a 0 than a 1, but I'm not against taking 1.
I have played against them a couple times, and they have all kind of died before they accomplished anything significant. Part of the problem is, like, if you hit the warg, warg isn't a cave dweller, and then once that warg dies, that you've kind of blown 30 points on 3 goblins, and that's not a good use of points. These things in this particular list, I think, are almost for me a never take, just because the opportunity cost of taking them 6 goblins is too high.
I mean, generally, Warg Marauders tend not to be great in any list ever since they've been nerfed in this edition.
Yeah.
And then finally we have the Bat Swarms, and the correct number of them is you definitely want more than 0. You almost definitely want more than 1. Yep. You want somewhere between 2 and 3, and that will vary on points. But you always kind of want to have 2 of them just in case one of them is not enough, or just get stuck in the wrong place, or gets killed in a stupid way.
Yeah, I don't think, by the way, you're going to take 3 at anything less than 800 points.
Probably not, no. Unless you take 4 and then you regret it.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean,
if you want to regret it the morning after, that's fine. Take as many as you want.
And the general idea for me was, if I have a lot of prowlers, I can put the bat swarms behind my opponent's ranks. Therefore, all of the prowlers trap my opponent, and I get the +3 to wound. But yeah, it didn't work.
Yeah,
So
that's the way to end up with a lot of dead bats.
Yeah. I mean, I did find it useful to basically just throw a bat against a hero and rage, and then basically force the hero to always strike. Otherwise, they will lose the fight. So if you have plenty of them, that's feasible. But yeah, generally you want two, and maybe a third one at like 750, 800.
Yeah.
So as I was saying before, pretty much at the start of this conversation, the thing is with this list that there are a lot of variants that you can take. You will obviously always need Musgur and Druzag, but then it's like your third and fourth heroes. They could be a captain and a shaman, or it could be Ashrak and a shaman, or Ashrak and a captain, or Ashrak and I don't know, maybe Wild War Chieftain and a shaman or something like that. So there's obviously a lot to think about there, and then depending on that, you have to decide how many spiders, how many prowlers, how many goblin warriors, how many orc warriors, and so there isn't really ever a clear-cut answer. Like I've seen so many different versions of this list, and they're all fine to some extent.
Okay, so now the question is, how do you build against it and how do you play against it?
Who wants to start?
So I think before we talk about building against it, I mean, we talked about building it. Maybe we should briefly talk about how this army fights, because I think that informs the conversation of how to fight against it. I mean, we've talked a bit about this, but I think it's probably worth taking a moment to talk about how this army kills, because this army does not function like most other armies where, you know, the way it kills is either, you know, its warriors, you know, it either kills through a head-to-head battle line, or it kills by having powerful heroes going in and calling heroic combats and knocking people down. It kills through a combination of shooting, battle tactics that split up your opponent. It kills through shooting and ambushes, I think, is how this army really functions. It shoots at distance with these 18-inch +1 to wound goblin bows that can outrange your opponents, because of your opponents can shoot at most 12 inches. Forces the enemy to kind of run forward against you, breaks you up, hopefully getting you to go in different directions, and then engages with throwing weapons from prowlers or just regular guys charging in, so that you can get you can take maximum advantage of your ruthless savagery +1 by surrounding chunks of the opponent's army and killing it. And then using your enraged and sometimes invisible spiders to either check or kill your opponent's heroes and basically take them out of the game one way or the other. Am I missing anything, Mick?
Yeah, that's about it. The one thing, so the shooting, that's something that everybody's really afraid of in this army because of the 18-inch range. But that's also something where I find people maybe are too afraid of sometimes, because ultimately, well, I suppose this will go into the very next question of how to beat this army. Ultimately, even if you have your 12 or 14 bows and they get the +1 to wounds, if they move, they hit on 6s. So it's kind of like having goblins that haven't moved and don't have the special rule, basically hitting on 5s and killing on 6s. So yeah, I suppose we'll move into that after. But yeah, the shooting is key to bring your opponent to you, and then split them up, and then use as many of your tricks as possible.
And I suppose I guess one other thing about this army is, and its shooting, is because it is so lower percentage to hit. You're hitting on basically 5s and 6s, unless you're talking about throwing weapons from the prowlers, which are useful for kind of a short amount of time before the lines close. But this army rewards players for setting up kill zones in the way that a lot of other armies don't. And what I mean by kill zones are getting the enemy to move into places on the board where as many of your shots can be felt as possible at one time. And it is really difficult for your opponent to get out of them without exposing themselves to being surrounded and getting hit by the ruthless savagery +1 to wound. And that's where this army is really its strongest, is if you can get an opponent into a bad tactical position where there isn't a good way to advance, and staying stationary isn't an option because he's going to get shot apart by all of your missile weapons. That's when this army wins. And that arranging that, and also being able to take advantage of all of the different moving parts of the tricky enraged and invisible spiders and creatures that this army has, those are not easy things to do. This is a powerful list when used by a player who kind of knows how all these moving parts work, but this is not a powerful list in the sense that you can just hand it to an inexperienced player and say, go kill him, and he'll be able to do it.
Yeah, it doesn't play itself in a way.
No, it doesn't.
You have to know what you're doing to be able to use it. But when you do know what you're doing, then it's actually very strong.
That's something I noticed at Nova, because some people at Nova were talking about how, like, well, a lot of people placed very well with it, but there were a decent number of people who also placed very poorly with it. So it's clearly not about the list's power, but it's about the skill of the player. And that's sort of, I found that to be an odd comparison to make, because the list power is directly proportional to the skill of the player. And when the player is skilled, the list is just ludicrously powerful compared to the access that other lists give you, because you have so many tools, and those tools are basically, you're able to use them in any situation. You can kill heroes if your opponent makes one mistake. If you like even outplay them tactically a little bit, you will crush them with your +1 to wound and your surrounding tactics and your throwing weapons and everything like that. And all of this shooting that you have and your constant nighttime bonus means that it is so easy to force people into these tactical situations and just kill tons of models. And on top of that, you've got a horde army that has a ton of fast moving pieces. So for a very experienced competitive player, I mean, this is just a field day of options. And I think that's why, at least for me, I feel it's currently the best army in the game, because when played right, you can do absolutely everything with it and get out of almost anything with it.
Yeah, but also that's why if you're new to the game, or if you're not very aware of what the army is capable of, or you don't have any experience with it, like the number of options can become overwhelming, and ultimately you just will be making too many mistakes. It's one of those things where if you don't have any options, but all of your options are solid, then then kind of the average thing you do is probably good. But here you have to be making the right place, because if you're not, then the army can just get demolished.
Yeah, this is very much not a beginner army. This is an army where the sum is worth a lot more than all of the parts. You gotta put it together and use it right.
A lot of armies that people view to be good, if you were to imagine a graph with player skill going this way and effectiveness of the army going upwards, a lot of the time, the line going sideways is very shallow. So as player skill increases, the effectiveness of the army doesn't increase as much. And those are usually the armies that a lot of people will point out as being overly strong. Like, as an example, Host of the Dragon Emperor. Well, obviously, if you are not as skilled at the game, you're not going to be nearly as successful as someone who is. It is an army that's very forgiving. Assault on Lothlorien is an army where, as player skill increases, the line skyrockets. Because you are able to fully understand and access all of these complicated options that are just better than anything your opponent has.
Yeah. I mean, you should never forget that the stock troops in this list are either fight 2, defense 5, or fight 3 with a two-handed weapon, therefore a -1 on the dual roll, and defense 4. So, you know, these guys will die like flies if they get into the wrong situation.
It's basically Goblin Town, but there's far less of them.
Yeah,
Like,
there's less
like
than
half of them.
Yeah. I mean, they got tricks, and you got to figure out how to
Yeah.
use those tricks. But all right, so let's talk about how to fight against this. So keeping in mind, there's 3 components of this list, I guess. There's the shooting, there is the numbers combined with the ruthless savagery +1 to wound if you get outnumbered, and there are, you know, the tricky sneaky beasts. So let's talk about how you
Well,
counter those. Start with the shooting. How doth thou counter the shooting?
Well, if you have more bows and you're able to get into the right position, you can actually outshoot it, because ultimately, even with the +1, they're still goblins. They're still only strength 2 bows. So if they've moved, they will be hitting on 6s, killing on 5s generally. And so if you're something like elves and you have the same number of bows, then you're hitting on 3s and killing on 5s. So very quickly.
Hitting on 3s? You mean 6?
No, 3s.
You're firing in the dark.
Well,
yeah,
there's no,
but within 12, you
within
still hit
12.
on
Oh,
the
within the
kills.
12.
12.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it's over 12 you cannot shoot.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah,
Yep,
yeah,
sorry.
it's siege engines that hit on 6s. So if you do manage to get yourself within 12, and you have more bows or better bows, chances are you can actually outshoot this army, and that causes a major issue for this army.
Yeah, the other thing about this is, even though they can shoot from outside of 12 inches, they still only shoot 18 inches with those bows, and they can only go 2.5 inches and then shoot, in which case they're only hitting on 6s. This is not an army that repositions well. This is an army that tends to want to deploy in one place, have the enemy walk to where it wants to be engaged, and then wants to engage it. And if you see this army set up, look for where this army is setting up its kill zone, right? Where does it want you to be so they can maximize all the firepower on it? And don't go there.
Yeah, that's actually exactly how I won one of my last games against it a few months ago.
Yeah,
where my opponent just set up kind of in the middle with his archers, but because of the short range, I just went kind of around it, and I just started poking at the other bits of the army.
Yeah, I mean, what this army will tend to do is it will, because there's a bunch of it, right? I mean, they have a bunch of crappy warriors, and what they get out of numbers, and there's only so many bows you can kind of bring to bear on a particular frontage. So they tend to set up in kind of long lines, and hope that you'll attack the middle of the line. Never attack the middle of the line. Always pick one side or the other and go there. And hopefully you can close and engage the enemy's left before the right, which is, waddling around at either 2.5 or 5 inches a turn, can really bring its additional bows or its additional numbers to bear.
Yeah, like by the time the other side comes, then the first side is already gone.
Right. Um, the way to really destroy this army is to destroy it in detail, where you close and engage, because each one of this, what you're going to get is a bunch of kind of like these subgroupings with all these, these little 12-figure war bands that are like 12 goblins. And no one of those war bands of 12-figure goblins is a threat to anything. The only reason they're a threat is when like all 4 or 5 of them come to bear at you at one time. So if you can close with and destroy one of these things at a time, you'll annihilate this army. Which is one of the things, especially if you're playing a mounted army, is one of the things you want to do is, pick the flank you want to turn that flank with your cavalry, destroy it, and then move in and kill the rest of it. Especially in Maelstrom scenarios, because in Maelstrom scenarios, the odds are some of this army is not going to end up where it wants to be, and you can gang up on that and destroy it first.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think the terror from shooting really does people a disservice oftentimes when playing
yeah,
against this army, because sometimes what you got to do is you've got to relax. If you've got maybe defense 5, defense 6, defense 7, something like that, an army like that that has a decent number of models, that has heroic march, take your time, maybe stay out of 18 inches for a bit, and find your opening that doesn't waddle right into the middle of all of their bows and throwing weapons where your army gets demolished. Find an angle to get in and then get in that way and work on trying to slowly dismantle the army. Because if you run in, especially if you have low defense, you will just get utterly demolished sometimes. I had a situation where we were playing, I think it was like modified Storm the Camp or something like that. No, it was modified Retrieval, and but it had banner points in it as well. And I had a Lake Town army without a banner, so I was forced to go in against Dad, and then I think he killed 8 models in the first turn of shooting, and just completely demolished me off the board. Um, and that was partially because I was forced to engage because of the banner, but it was also partially because I walked into his trap. And
Yeah,
well, it was also because I was defense 4. But
if
you
you
do not
walk
want
in,
to walk in there. Do not
yeah,
walk in there.
yeah, you can if you walk into the kill zone of this army and it brings everything that can shoot to bear on you, you can easily lose half a dozen models a turn.
yeah, even more.
And that's not sustainable unless you're Goblin Town. And if you're Goblin Town, you can do that, right? I mean, if you're Goblin Town, what you're going to do is you're just going to attack all points on the line at the same point, and you'll lose a half dozen models the first turn, you lose a half dozen models the second turn, you'll lose a half dozen models the turn after that, and then the rest of your 90 models will overwhelm the remains of Assault on Lothlorien. But if you're not Goblin Town, that's going to be a problem.
Yeah, yeah. The other thing is if your opponent has lower prowlers, then what you don't want to happen is for you to move, then for your opponent to come within Prowler throwing daggers range, throw all those daggers, and then next turn win a heroic move, charge you, and throw all those daggers again, because that just takes out so many of your front rank warriors.
Yeah, although I mean, at times you have to do that, right? Because if you don't do that, then what
Well,
happens? What happens is, you the whole you come up just outside of 6 inches, you can't charge him, you get volleyed with bows. Next turn you move within 6 inches, the enemy resets, so you're still outside of 6 inches, and it all happens again. So at a certain point you have to do it. And by the way, taking the heroic move, once you've ended your move within 6 inches, you take your volley of those throwing weapons from the prowlers. You want to be in a position to call the heroic move the next turn, and force your opponent to counter, and then hope that you win that roll off, and then you can charge him. Because if you don't, one of two things is going to happen. Either he's going to charge you with throwing weapons on the way in, which you don't want to have happen, or even worse, he's going to pull back outside of 6 inches, and you have to do the whole thing
Do
again
the
and
thing
take
again,
another
yeah.
volley. And that's not great. But all right, so that's the shooting. I think the takeaway from dealing with the shooting is close quickly, and do not close within the kill zone. Go outside the kill zone or hit the flank of the army or something like that.
Or also, blinding light is surprisingly good if your opponent's prowler heavy. If they're just if they don't really have any prowlers, then hitting on 6s, they don't care about your blinding light. But if they do have a lot of prowlers, then hitting on 4s versus hitting on 6s is massive. And
Yeah.
a prowler heavy list will be smaller than a normal goblin list.
I will
Even
say
against the
this.
archers, because the archers, when they don't move compared to when they do move, if the archers move, they basically half
Yeah,
their chances
that's
of
true.
hitting, which will in turn half the amount of kills they're getting, roughly. So if you're playing as this army, you generally want your archers to stay still while shooting, if at all possible. And if you're playing against them, forcing the archers to move, or just giving the blinding light to reduce those casualties, even if they don't have a lot of prowlers, is super useful.
Yeah.
And by the way, if you are this army playing blinding light, what you do is you take all your archers, you use them to shoot into the blinding light. Go ahead and move them to, get better shots if you need to, because you're still getting that +1 if you're shooting from the darkness into the light, +1 to wound. And then you take the rest of your army and your prowlers and you kill everything else that is not hiding within that 6-inch zone. And hopefully you've got a scenario like domination where like there's going to be fights outside of that zone. If you're playing a scenario where you got to fight shield wall to shield wall, that's kind of a different analysis. But all right, so the next thing is how do you deal with those numbers and the ruthless savagery special rule? So how do you deal with the fact that everyone gets +1 to wound if they gang up on you?
I think we've discussed this at least a little bit, which is try and get around and get to the flanks of their armies. Don't walk into the middle of the army and expect everything to go fine and dandy, because then you're going to get surrounded and killed. So get on the sides of the army, fight it so that you are using your presumably inferior numbers in a way where they have an advantage. So fight portions of the army. And in the same sense, if you have a horde of models, get in their face and make sure that they don't have any opportunities to get in and try and trap you. And that I think we've probably mentioned this before on this episode, but larger armies do much better against this army than smaller ones, because a lot of the power of Assault on Lothlorien is the ability to kill heroes and invalidate heroes, and then get in on the big high defense troops and kill them anyways, because their defense doesn't matter because they get so many +1s to wound. And if you have a horde that's like either fight 3 or fight 4, it's going to be very powerful against these guys.
Yeah. Yeah. By the way, fight 4 strength 4 models can be devastating against this army, especially the prowler variants of this army, because once you actually get in on them, you outfight them, so you're winning on ties, and then you're killing them on a 4-up. And kind of once the prowlers go down and you get into those squishy goblin spearmen behind, that's when this army tends to fall apart. So like something like a Numenorian front line backed by a line of Morannons is a really good counter to this particular list.
Mm-hmm. With that in mind, about fighting as prowlers, it's really key for this army to keep a banner around, and really key for the opponent to kill the banner. because ultimately, if you don't have the banner and you are prowlers, then one of your guys gets a -1, the other one just rolls 1 dice. Whilst if you do have a banner behind, then you can re-roll the dice which is the spearman dice. So essentially, you will be in positions very often where you effectively get a third roll because you're re-rolling the spearman. So killing the banner is actually key in every possible way if you can get to it. And so this army also like starts falling apart once it doesn't have a banner nearby. If it's prowler heavy.
Very important distinction.
So let's talk about the beasties. How do you counter the beasties? And by the beasties, I mean primarily spiders, enraged, invisible, or otherwise, but also bat swarms, and to the extent they appear warg marauders or wild wargs that are enraged.
Well, you shoot them first of all, because they don't
Yes,
have
you do.
they don't have the cave dweller. And if you haven't shot them, well then just give up and run.
Yeah, I mean, you do need to, if Ashrak is there, you need to have a line of guys behind screening off your heroes so your heroes don't get trapped and slaughtered from behind.
Yeah, you
and
just need to like scatter your models behind your ranks.
Yeah, you need a scattering of guys back there, which unfortunately takes more models off your front line and exacerbates your outnumbering problem. But you got to do it, or else you're going to find that your heroes are getting picked off one by one, and then your army's going to go down, or your banner is going to get eaten by an enraged spider or something awful like that, and then you'll go down. But you have to be able to kind of fight in 360 degrees, unless you can take Ashrak out of play, which, by the way, is harder than it sounds because he paralyzes guys that attack him.
He always sits at the back, so like,
he's always hiding at the back somewhere. But maybe you have something that flies that can go hunting him, or a sorcerer's blast or something like that. He's also, by the way, somebody, if you have like a Saruman on your list, he's also somebody who's worth just transfixing him, right? And just take him out for a turn that way.
or just blast him, because he's quite easy to wound.
Yeah, that's true.
Transfixes to make it where you just can't fire that turn.
But yeah, you can't fire that turn, and you can also do it from 18 inches away, where you need to kind of be in a position to sorcerer's blast. And I mean, if you sorcerer's blast him, there's a chance he's just going to get up, dust himself off, and then cast the spell afterwards.
Yeah, but then he will have been moved backwards. He may be out of range if
maybe not
if he went far.
But if you transfix him, it's generally an easier spell to get off, and he's got to resist that, right, with some of his will. So
which
either he resists it or he's
going to want to do.
Yeah, either resists it or it just kind of gets through. But anyway, he's one of those key, because if you can take him out of play even for a turn or two, you can take those guys that are protecting your ranks and send them toward the front to do more useful things. So it's worth, if you've got somebody like a Saruman or a wizard or something like that that can just kind of throw off a transfix, he may well be the guy you want to do.
So yeah, what if your opponent has both Druzhag and Ashrak? Who do you transfix?
I think you.
So I'm going to interject for a second. I generally do neither. What I like to do, at least with my spellcasters, and I think I did this against Devin, to pretty all right results, because my Galadriel refused to cast a spell like almost that entire game. But basically what you do is you prey on one spider or one bat, and you compel them over the lines, or you compel them around, you swamp them with your hero, and then you protect him with warriors. You kill that one guy. Then next turn you move on to the next guy, you kill that one guy. And you do it in a way where they're transfixed, so there's no way this hero is going to die, and they're completely obscured from any assassination attempts because you've pulled them behind your line, and they're completely protected by troops. And once you start chipping away at those bats and those spiders, you don't really care about the wargs, you just care about the bats and the spiders. You can start dealing with them that way. And I found that to be much more effective than trying to transfix Drew's Hag and Ashrak, because that transfix is like a temporary stopgap, right?
Sure.
Like it's gonna stop them once, and it's only stopping them if you have priority, and you're not actually doing anything proactive against the beasts. So you still need to be careful with your heroes because next turn they might get swamped and killed. So I personally, when I play against them, I like to be a bit more proactive with my spells and try and safely take out the key monsters like bats and spiders.
See, I
Yeah, so
find actually that if you don't have priority and you have a caster, that's better for you. Because whatever they send forward, whatever they enrage, you can just transfix that.
unless
That
it's
is true.
invisible. Unless it's
Though
invisible.
Yeah.
that does still support my point of casting on the actual beasts instead of casting on the casters.
Yeah. So this may come down to whether you have priority or not. If the player, if you have priority and the player has been cagey and he hasn't put at least his spiders in a place where they can be kind of hauled over the battle line and jumped on, and he hasn't placed his bats someplace where they're within 6 inches of the battle line where they can be hauled over and jumped on, which he may not have done, you're not necessarily going to have that option. And even if you just transfix one of the spiders, there may be 3 more waiting in line. But on the other hand, but you're right. If if you've lost priority, the other guy goes first and he's enraged one particular spider and sent it in, by God, yes, that's the one that you transfix. If you don't have a chance to jump a spider or a bat, but you could still get an invisible spider that's going to run through the lines and come up behind somebody, then maybe you want to transfix Ashrak or Druzhak. Probably Ashrak, because he's the one who can make that guy penetrate your lines and get around behind. But that's a good point with the priority, that what Evan's suggesting works better if you've lost priority. It may be that the preemptive strike on one of the casters works better if you've won priority.
So at the moment we're seeing that casters are useful, larger numbers are useful.
Yeah.
A lot of bows is useful.
Yeah. Look, but which is not, by the way, to take anything away from Evan's point, that what your heroes want to be doing is killing off these monsters one way or the other. Because there are no killy heroes in this army for your heroes to go after. And it's probably not a productive use of their time and resources to kill 1 or 2 random prowlers a turn. But you do want to have your heroes, once the spiders and the bats get committed, that's who you try and kill, right, with your heroes. Because you aren't, even if you trap a bat, you're not going to kill it in 1 turn, but a hero can trap a bat if they kill it in 1 turn, or a hero can kill a bat if they trap it in 1 turn. And that is, that's kind of what you want your heroes to be doing when you're fighting against this army list. Is their job is to kill off the monsters, and once they've done that, then they can start to hunt down the enemy heroes to get the points, either by killing the army leader or whatever it is they need to do.
Well, the thing is, if you manage to kill the monsters, then you're probably in a really good spot.
Yeah, no, that's the thing. If you kill off the monsters from this list, then it becomes a much easier list to deal with. But the same thing with the casters, right? If you can kill off their casters in particular, if you can kill off Druzhak and Ashrak, the whole scary beastie thing disappears.
Yeah, even just Druzhak,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
Ashrak Ashrak only has that one might point to half the
Right.
fight value, and even if you get like a bat swarm and a spider in, or an invisible spider in,
You can just
they're
drive.
probably not going to kill the model anymore because they're not enraged.
Yeah.
So I think if you're trying to stop the army or the army's killing power that way, I think Drew's Hag is your #1 target.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
But
mean, if you
keep in
feel
mind
like
that's
getting
not
over.
easy, right?
Yeah.
Druzag's going to be hiding far behind the lines with lots of goblins between him and you. So it's going to take a long time for you to get your heroes to hack their way into him. Whereas they can generally call a heroic combat, get in on a spider and kill it once the spiders get committed.
Yeah, I think have I mentioned throwing weapons against them and throwing spears yet?
No, not against them. Go ahead.
No. Okay. So yeah, this is another set of armies that can be pretty effective against them. Are armies that also have throwing weapons that maybe even have more throwing weapons. So if you've got a Grimhammer heavy Erebor list, which also is doubly effective because their defense is pretty high, so they can take a couple of shots. So yeah, an Erebor list, the Foot Rohan lists are really good at this too, just taking a swarm of throwing spears. They're even better because they actually outrange the Prowlers. So they can oftentimes outshoot the goblins, and not only outshoot them, but do so reliably and in a sustainable way. Because if you move your archers within 12 inches of the goblins and you're out shooting them, they're going to move into 6 inches pretty quickly and start throwing stuff at you. But if you outrange them with throwing weapons, you can often pretty reliably outshoot them and keep outshooting them and use your 6 inches of movement to outmaneuver them whilst outshooting them. So if you're really just sick of these armies, then consider taking a lot of throwing weapons or lists that have a lot of throwing weapons in them.
Yeah, that's what
Yeah.
I noticed in the UK. There's a lot of people playing things like Theodra's Guard. You have a lot of throwing weapons. You have a lot of troops. You have your fight floor all over the place.
Mounted lists also can be really good against these as long as you have the right board to fight on. Obviously, you don't want to fight these guys on a board covered with buildings and woods with a mounted list because they'll just hide in all the buildings in the woods and shoot you to pieces from them. But on a relatively open board, or in a scenario where they have to like come out and play, like a like a hold ground or something like that, the mounted lists allow you can pick apart this army pretty well because it waddles along. So you can go and kill a warband a turn of this army with your mounted list.
Yeah, the other thing that this army struggles against is terror, because ultimately, you do have your shaman, so that's fine against terror, against certain lists. But if the terror is backed by the Witch King or any other ring wraith that might be able to take out the shaman's will, then the Prowler version has to pass courage in order to charge, in order to throw, so that significantly reduces their effectiveness. And the normal Goblin version, or just like any version, the thing is with Goblin armies in general, in a standard Goblin army, you don't really care about terrorists so much because you have enough models that eventually someone's gonna pass and you're gonna get into combat. But this army is smaller than your average massive Goblin horde. So if you're failing your courage test to charge, eventually you may struggle to be able to
Yeah.
bring enough models in.
I mean, less so if you've got the Prowler heavy version of this, because if you don't charge, it's like, all right, I'll just stand here and throw my throwing weapon at it
Yeah,
again.
but then they will charge you.
Then they'll charge you. Yeah. But
Yeah. So then
or you
throwing
The
you
point
back
is
out of
that they don't
range.
get the point is that they don't get their throwing
Throwing
weapons on
weapon
the
on the way
charge,
in.
which is
Yeah.
pretty big
Yeah.
because
Fair point.
because you don't have the -1 to hit when you're charging in with throwing weapons. So that's oftentimes a lot of where
Yeah.
Prowlers get their kills, and they lose that option.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially if there's Witch King around and your shaman has been sapped. It's gonna be situations where, okay, you might get a goblin in, but then another goblin might fail, and then your Prowler actually gets surrounded by two enemies.
Yep.
So it becomes really sketchy at that point. So anything, so that's why like armies like Black Nemorians are actually really strong against this.
Yeah, fair point. Okay. All right. Any last thoughts?
No,
I mean,
I mean, it's a good list, but it has its weaknesses. Like
Yeah.
there's some major weaknesses in it.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is like we've said, this is a list that all of us have lost to. But I mean, this is an army that I've tabled on more than one occasion.
Yeah, same.
Because it's, you know, if it's in the hands of a new player or gets into a situation where it's forced to kind of fight disjointedly, it can get picked apart. And I've had that happen to me once or twice when I've played this army too. Is if you can't bring this entire army to bear on your opponent at one time, you're going to have some real problems. And there are a bunch of scenarios that kind of force that. So this is like divide and conquer is the nemesis of this particular army, because there's no way around that. And if you have a cavalry army against this army and divide and conquer, you've got some real opportunities to take it down. So, all righty.
Oh,
Well, thanks everybody. So we should let people know, as I'm sure people are aware, our podcasts have become somewhat more erratic for a variety of reasons, and I think most of us are undergoing some life changes. Rainier is in the process. Rainier has moved from Honduras to California. Shortly, he'll be moving again to the Netherlands. So Rainier is mobile. Rob and I have both changed jobs with all of the stress and scheduling issues that causes. Evan's getting set to head off to college. Mick is, I think, still in his his
I'm just
occupation
always
has
unreliable because of my
has-
occupation.
his occupation has picked up again, and Devin has turned into a large letter D, which causes a whole bunch of different problems. So
Yeah, for anyone listening on the Spotify, they're gonna be like so confused. They're gonna be like, did he just call him a douchebag or something?
no, he's a D.
He is literally the letter.
Yeah, that's
But
right.
as far as I can tell, all of us are gonna be at Articon this year.
Yeah, I think so.
Yep.
So get your
yeah,
tickets
that's
for
right.
Articon.
We will
Everybody else.
see you there.